Okay. Let's see how we're looking. Hi, everyone. We're just going live now and connecting to both YouTube and Facebook. Give us a moment, please, as we connect to our platforms and everybody has a moment to join. Thanks.
We are up on Facebook, on YouTube.
Yes, we are.
And YouTube, Facebook up, and we're up on Facebook now too.
Okay, we are good. All right then. Good evening, everyone. I'm Wendy Fournier. I'm with the National Autism Association. I want to welcome you to tonight's webinar. We are very happy to have with us our friend Michael Beloff again tonight. Michael is a wealth advisor. He is a founding partner and wealth advisor with Belvedere Wealth Partners, and he is also the father of a son with autism. So he is going down the same road, has been down the road for a long time, and for many years has been an expert in financial planning for parents and families and individuals with special needs. So tonight is a follow-up to a presentation that you did for us a couple months back, Michael, when you did a really nice overview of all of the things that you need to properly plan for your child's future, to get them set up when you're no longer there. And you touched on all the different pieces, of which there are so many. And we had a huge number of people saying, can we get more info on each specific topic? And the interest in all of the topics was almost even. But one of the things that that had a high number of people responding to our poll was talking about government benefits that are available to families and individuals with special needs. So I want to thank you so much for coming back tonight to address this really important topic. I would like to welcome all of our followers on YouTube and on Facebook who are here to join us for this presentation. Please type in the comments, tell us where you're from, where you're tuning in from. Feel free to chat with each other in the comments during the presentation. Please hold your questions till the end, because we will have a nice Q&A time that Michael is putting aside to answer your specific questions. But let's let him get through the presentation and see if he covers what you had in mind before you post those questions, okay? Michael, I'm going to turn it over to you, and thank you once again for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Wendy, and thank you for having me back. As Wendy said, like many of you, I have a child with autism. My son, Ben, is 27, has what's now considered level 2 autism with subdiagnosis of apraxia, central auditory processing disorder, anxiety disorder, and a seizure disorder at this stage. So like many of your kids, we all have different diagnoses and different ways that it impacts our kids. And so as a financial planner, I put together this workshop for how benefits and services work to help educate families on that topic. I think it can be challenging because especially when your kids are still in school, everything's kind of coordinated. When you then get into the adult system, say starting at 18, when your child becomes a legal adult, to when they age out of the school district program at 21 or 22, each of the different benefits have slightly different criteria for qualification and slightly different rules. So I've put this workshop to go through the individual benefits. And I think it's very important as you look to see what might be available for your child. You look at them as siloed. While the different benefits do interact, each of them are going to have their own separate rules, some of which may be state specific. So why don't we start going through that? Again, here's just information about me. There'll be some contact information at the end for those of you who want to reach out. In addition, because I am in financial services, we do need to have some disclaimers. We will be talking a lot about legal issues and a little bit about tax issues. This should not be considered individual legal or tax advice. And of course, you should work with your own professionals to understand how these rules impact your child and your family. But let's get started. We're going to cover 6 main government benefits programs. Those will include some that are based on financial need. Those include Supplemental Security Income, Medicaid, SNAP, and affordable housing, as well as 2 non-means tested programs that your child may be eligible for at some point, including Social Security Disability Insurance and Medicare. And here's a little kind of graph in terms of how these 6 benefits impact your child. There are programs that are based on financial need, meaning that in order to receive them, you have to have either limited income or limited assets or both. And some that are not based on financial need. Some provide monetary benefits like SSI, SNAP, and affordable housing, as well as SSDI. And some provide medical benefits like Medicaid and Medicare, but also in some circumstances, Medicaid can provide other benefit supports. A lot of families get very confused because the names sound familiar. Lots of families get SSI and SSDI mixed up, and they get Medicaid and Medicare mixed up. And it's very, very important as you're managing these benefits for your child or helping them manage it themselves, that you understand which benefit they're on, how they've qualified for it, and how they keep it. If continuing to keep that benefit is going to be important to manage their care on a going forward basis. So I think it's important to start with, what does it mean to be disabled? All of you on this call, I'm assuming most of you have a child with autism, you have a child with a disability. But that doesn't mean they're quote unquote disabled. The federal government has a very specific definition of what it means to be disabled. And this is important to keep in mind, especially for those of you who have kids who have say level 1 or high functioning autism, to understand what it means to be disabled in order to get access to benefits and services. Now, if you are under 18, the government's definition of disabled is that you have a medically determinable physical or mental impairment, which results in marked and severe functional limitations that will last for at least 12 months or result in death. So when you're under 18, you are disabled if your medical condition causes that marked and severe functional limitations. However, the definition of disabled changes the day your kid turns 18. And at that point, it's about, does your medically determinable physical or mental impairment result in the inability to engage in any substantial gainful activity? SGA, substantial gainful activity, means the ability to work and in 2026, earn more than $1,690 a month. So as an adult, you are only quote unquote disabled if your disability prevents you from working above that level. By the way, if you're also blind, you can make more money. The SGA for individuals who are legally blind is $2,830. That difference is because back in the 70s, the blind lobby got an inflation rider on the SGA amount before other disabilities got that. And it's a quirk in the law. But meeting that definition, especially for those of you who are looking to apply for disability benefits, and what all that triggers, it's important to really understand that's how you're proving to Social Security that you are quote unquote disabled. So now we're going to start with the means tested benefits, the benefits for mostly adults with disabilities who are financially needy according to the rules in these particular benefits. And we're going to start with Supplemental Security Income, SSI. And what is SSI? Well, it's a federally funded income supplement program funded from the general tax revenues, not Social Security. So even though SSI is administered by the Social Security Administration, the amount of SSI comes not from your Social Security FICA taxes, but from the general revenues of the federal government. SSI will not be impacted if we run through the Social Security Trust Fund. But it is a welfare program. SSI is welfare, and it's generally designed to help the aged, blind, and disabled who have little or no income and resources to pay for their basic needs for food and shelter. And that kind of what SSI is meant to be used for, although it can be used for lots of things, we'll talk about that. That desire to have food and shelter taken care of is very important for certain aspects of SSI that you may need to look at. Now, when your child is under 18, you are automatically their legal guardian. That means you have a responsibility to financially provide for your child. And so while your child is under the age of 18, parents' assets and income are deemed available to the child. And that is why the vast majority of children under the age of 18 who meet that definition of disability will probably not receive SSI because of the low asset and income limits. It is possible and it does happen, but the vast majority of folks with disabilities who are under 18 do not receive SSI. Now, once your child turns 18, even if you choose to become your child's legal guardian or conservator, their eligibility for means-tested benefits like SSI and Medicaid, although there are some exceptions for some other things, which we'll cover, is based solely on the child's assets and the child's income. So let's talk about how you qualify for SSI and what you get. Well, in 2026, the maximum SSI that you could receive is $994 on a monthly basis. In order to receive SSI, you must meet two financial tests. The first and the easiest is the asset test. In order to receive SSI, you need to have less than $2,000 at the end of the month. That $2,000 figure has not changed since 1989. And it's not adjusted for inflation. And it's a yes/no. If you have less than $2,000, you might be eligible for SSI. If you have more than $2,000, you do not get any SSI. Then there is an income test. And the income test gets a little bit more complicated depending on whether the income is unearned or earned, meaning that you work and earn money. And we'll go into a little bit more detail in both of these tests. So first we'll talk about what is a resource. For the resource test, what counts towards the $2,000? Well, under Social Security rules, and by the way, there are rules to Social Security. They're called the POMS, the Program Operations Manual System. And you can actually go and read all these rules to figure this out. They are hard to understand, but they are available for folks to look up, and I will cite some of them during these slides. So, generally a resource, things that count towards the $2,000 are cash, bank accounts, stocks, savings bonds. I hate savings bonds. Land, life insurance, personal property, automobiles, and anything else you own which could be changed to cash and used to purchase food and shelter. There are a number of exemptions. So a home that you live in, a home that the disabled individual lives in, is an exempt asset. Yes, your child can own their own home and still qualify for SSI and Medicaid, but it's not a great idea. And we'll discuss that when we get to Medicaid, especially if your child will be looking to access Medicaid waiver programs. One automobile owned by the SSI recipient does not count as a resource. Household goods, personal effects, a burial space or a prepaid funeral does not count. Life insurance owned by the disabled individual. This is not life insurance on mom and dad, owned by mom and dad, going into a special needs trust. This is life insurance owned by the individual disabilities. Leftover money on their SNAP food stamps does not count. real property unable to be sold, and a couple of other things are exemptions from the $2,000 asset limit for SSI. In addition, if your child has an old style custodial account, when you see a statement that says UGMA or UTMA, that is an exempt asset until the legal age of majority in your state. So in my state, I live in Connecticut, a UGMA or UTMA account is an exempt asset until age 21, at which point it's supposed to be turned over to the individual, and at that point it counts towards the $2,000. But it is generally a good idea to get rid of that money in a legal way so that that money at 21 or the age of majority in your state, so it won't count against them at that point. Then the question is, what is income? So income is any item an individual receives in cash or in kind, I'll explain that in a moment, that can be used to meet the person's basic needs for food or shelter. Income for SSI purposes includes the receipt of any item which can be applied directly or indirectly by sale or conversion to meet the basic needs. And they break that out into two kinds. There is unearned income, which are the things that you would normally expect. Interest on a savings account, dividends on a stock or a mutual fund, and then things you wouldn't expect that Social Security counts as income. Cash gifts. If you give your kid cash or grandma writes a check, that will count as income. There are some exclusions, and I'll go into an example in a second. Child support. If you are the custodial parent for a disabled child and you receive child support for your adult child, even though the child support is paid to you as the custodial parent, that child support counts as income for SSI purposes. There is only one way around that. You have to go back to court and get a court order to have the non-custodial parent pay child support directly to a first-party special needs trust. The details for that are beyond what we're going to talk about today. But because more states are allowing for child support past the age of 18 for a disabled child, you should see how those rules work in your state. Unearned income also includes SSDI. We'll describe how that works in a second, as well as in-kind support and maintenance, which I will also describe. Now, besides unearned income, there's also earned income. Many individuals with disabilities now work. There are some exclusions. So, and unfortunately, these numbers have not changed since 1973. So the first $20 a month of general income is excluded from the income test. So if grandma writes a birthday check for your 20-year-old child who's receiving SSI, that $100 check, the first $20 doesn't count, and the next $80 will reduce their SSI. And for unearned income, the reduction is dollar for dollar. So that $100 check will reduce their SSI by $80. In addition, there's an exclusion for the next $65 of unearned income. There are exclusions for in-kind support and maintenance. I'm going to cover that in a second. Medical and social services, like getting a budget through your Medicaid waiver program, does not count as income and will not reduce SSI. Food and shelter received during a medical confinement does not count as income. Income tax refunds do not count as income. Loan proceeds and distributions from special needs trust not spent on food and shelter do not count as income. Note that if your child gets that $100 check and 80 of that will count as income during that month, if the $100 is still in their bank account, at the end of the month, it now becomes a resource and counts towards the $2,000 asset test. Now, the way that income, SSI is impacted by income is different. When there is unearned income, after that $20 general income exclusion, you lose $1 of SSI for every dollar of unearned income. Why is that? SSI is a welfare payment. They do not care. Social Security does not care that your children are expensive. Our kids cost a lot of money, more than what the government will provide for them. But because this money is being given to them to help them pay for food and shelter, if they have access to other funds that they didn't earn, the government says you don't need as much welfare that month. That's how it works. For earned income, you get a little bit more of a break. If you don't have any unearned income in that month, you can make $85 in a month before your SSI starts to get reduced. And then after that, your SSI is only reduced $1 for every $2 that you earned. So for example, my son has a part-time job. If he makes $85 in a month, then the first $85 is exempt, and the next $300 that remains will reduce his SSI by $150. There is a 2-month delay. If he works in July, the income is reported in August. And if there's an impact on his SSI, it's reflected in the September SSI payment. Now, in most states, access to Medicaid is for adults is based on receiving at least $1 of SSI. And so if between the earned income and unearned income, if SSI is reduced to 0, there may be some challenges in retaining your Medicaid benefits. There are ways around that, but just be aware of that as you're managing this benefit for your child. Now, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about this concept called in-kind support and maintenance, sometimes referred to as ISM. So since SSI is primarily, but doesn't have to be exclusively used to pay for shelter, if your child receives free or reduced cost shelter, that is considered a type of unearned income called ISM. Now, in-kind support and maintenance used to include food, but Social Security changed that rule about 2 years ago. And as of September, end of September 2024, food is no longer considered ISM. So you no longer have to charge your kid for board. A lot of people have room and board arrangements. Now, how much do you lose? Well, the reduction for getting free or reduced cost rent is capped at 1/3 of your child's SSI plus $20. That's a number called the presumed maximum value. And the maximum reduction of SSI for getting free rent or reduced cost rent is $350.33. Now, what is your way of getting around that? Well, the way to get around not giving your child free or reduced cost rent is to charge them rent. That's why for many of you, you've heard about, I need to charge my kid rent once they get onto SSI. Now, there used to be 2 primary ways of charging enough rent to not have your rent be considered free or reduced cost. The primary one that many people used was charging pro rata share of expenses. And there are 9 specific costs that Social Security says you must charge and add up and divide by the number of people in your house and charge your kid that amount in order for your child to pay their pro rata share of expenses. Now, it's only these specific expenses. It's the mortgage, including the property insurance, real property taxes, or the rent, your heating, fuel, gas, electricity, water, sewer, and garbage. Just those things. Add them up, divide them by the number of people in your house, and charge that to your kid. Unfortunately, in many areas of the country, that amount is more than they're receiving in SSI. And so they really can't pay their pro rata share, and their SSI will continue to be reduced. You can also charge your kid market rent. Find out what it costs to rent a room in your area of the country. But as of that same end of September 2024, Social Security changed the rules based on a couple of court cases. And now charging at least rent of at least that presumed maximum value figure, which is $351.33 for 2026. That is considered creating a business arrangement so that the rent, so the ISM is not reduced because they're receiving free or reduced cost rent. What that really means now is that as long as you're charging your kid at least that amount a month of rent, and you've notified Social Security you are changing how you're charging your kid rent, you should be able to receive the full amount of SSI, absent any reductions for work or other unearned income. Now, generally, if SSI is given for an adult, that adult is generally assumed to be able to manage their own money. Many of our kids are not capable of managing their own affairs. If someone who receives SSI is not capable of managing their own money, Social Security will assign a person called a representative payee to manage the SSI money for that adult. Unfortunately, Social Security does not recognize guardianship or conservatorship or a power of attorney. If your child is incapable of managing their own money, you have to become the representative payee for your child. Now, it can be the same person who's the guardian or conservator, but it's a different role. And when you are the representative payee for your child's SSI or even SSDI money, you have to create a separate, non-commingled bank account for your adult child, meaning that their SSI money has to go into a separate account. You can't put your money into that account. You can't even put your child's other money into that account. That money is supposed to be separate. It's kind of run like a mini special needs trust. And that money is supposed to be used first for the recipient's current needs, like food and shelter and things like that. If there is leftover money, you are allowed to save that. But remember, you can't save too much of it in this bucket because they have to have less than $2,000 at the end of the month. As the representative payee, you are responsible for keeping records of how you spent your child's money. And you're supposed to keep those records for at least 2 years and file an annual report stating how you spent the beneficiary's money. Now, Social Security does have a small bit of heart. If you are the representative payee who lives with your child, then that annual report is waived. But Social Security can ask for those records at any time. In addition, as representative payee, you are required to report changes that could affect their payment, including if the beneficiary starts a job, stops a job, has more than $2,000 in assets, moves, marries, or leaves the US for more than 30 days. All of those things are things that can impact their SSI payment. So now we're going to move on to Medicaid. So what is Medicaid? Unlike SSI, which is purely a federal benefit and works the same everywhere in the country, Medicaid is a jointly funded federal-state health insurance program for low-income and financially needy people, targeting specifically children, the aged, blind, and disabled, and other people eligible to receive certain assisted income payments. It's administered by your state Medicaid agency. And generally, the federal government provides about half the money for it, and your state provides about half the money for it. Now, besides providing health insurance, traditionally Medicaid has provided institutional care. Think a nursing home for the aged, blind, and disabled. But more recently, Medicaid has provided services to people in the community through something called a Medicaid waiver. We'll describe a little bit more about what that means. So let's talk about eligibility for traditional Medicaid. Typically, you have to be disabled, meeting Social Security's criteria for being disabled that we discussed earlier. Now, most states, 34 of them, if you receive at least $1 of SSI, you automatically qualify for Medicaid. There are several other SSI criteria states, Alaska, Idaho, Kansas, Nebraska, Nevada, Oklahoma, Oregon, and Utah, where SSI qualifies you for Medicaid, but you need to fill out a separate application. And then there are the 209B states, my home state of Connecticut, Hawaii, Illinois, Minnesota, Missouri, New Hampshire, North Dakota, and Virginia, where those states may require separate applications and separate criteria for Medicaid that can be different from the other states. Now, Medicaid has a 5-year look back, meaning that if your child had money and they gave it away, not spent it, they're allowed to spend it, they're allowed to transfer it to an ABLE account. But if they give away the money, that's a transfer violating Medicaid and may delay their access to Medicaid if you can't account for how they got below $2,000 within 5 years of applying for traditional Medicaid as an adult. Now, most states have a similar, use the same asset limit, the $2,000 asset limit for SSI for Medicaid. But a bunch of states have a higher Medicaid asset limit, California being the highest at $130,000. And my home state of Connecticut has the honor of having the lowest Medicaid asset limit of $1,600. Why is that important to understand? Well, in Connecticut, while I can have $2,000 to have SSI and $1,600 to have Medicaid, if I want both, I have to keep my resources under $1,600. On the other hand, if I'm in New York, I can have $33,000 in change and get Medicaid. But if I want Medicaid and SSI, I have to keep my resources under $2,000. Now, there are new rules coming in for Medicaid starting next year that will have certain work requirements and renewals every 6 months, as opposed to Medicaid's traditional renewal every 12 months. At this time, those work and renewal rules do not impact traditional Medicaid for the aged, blind, and disabled that most of you are going to be using to access for your child to get Medicaid waiver supports. So while, yes, we can take a little bit of a sigh of relief because the rules won't impact our kids, the Medicaid cuts may impact our kids because when they cut Medicaid, it cuts Medicaid everywhere. And states may no longer be willing to spend their half of Medicaid funds to get the government's half of Medicaid services. And that's something to keep in mind and advocate for in your home state. Now, as a health insurance program, Medicaid is what I would call broad, but not deep. It covers a lot of stuff. Inpatient and outpatient services, doctors, dentists, laboratory and x-rays, most services in a hospital, prescription coverage, ambulance service. But as a health insurance program, because Medicaid reimbursements to doctors are very, very low compared to, say, Medicare and private insurance, many doctors have chosen not to accept Medicaid as health insurance. Now, if your child is under traditional Medicaid for the aged, blind, and disabled, which most of your kids will be on, they can still be on the family health insurance through at least age 26 for health insurance purposes, which means that in that case, the family's health insurance will be primary and Medicaid will be secondary for payment purposes. Now, the main reason why many families want Medicaid, and you will want this for your adult children, even if they have access to family health insurance, is for state services. Most state services for adults with disabilities are funded through Medicaid. So while there are some programs for children where they can get Medicaid waiver supports in some states when they're under 18, despite the parent asset and income, once your child reaches 18, in order for those Medicaid waiver supports to continue, they have to be receiving traditional Medicaid themselves. The reason why it's called the Medicaid waiver program is that states are allowed to waive certain requirements, such as the services having to be available in a nursing home or institution, or certain asset and income levels in certain situations. Probably the most important Medicaid waiver program for adults is the home and community-based services waivers that allows Medicaid waiver supports to be provided in the community. Those would include things like day supports, some employment support services, and residential services, including group homes and supported housing. Other benefits that folks see are Katie Beckett waivers, which are available in some states to help physically disabled children, regardless of their mental capacity. And there are other Medicaid waivers that will vary greatly from state to state. In a national workshop like this, it's hard to go through all the different Medicaid waivers, but just know that waiver services are not required. They are discretionary at the state basis. And that is why many states have a wait list for access to Medicaid waiver supports past the age of 18. Some states, ones I'm more familiar with, like New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts, California, Michigan, often have no wait list for day supports when children age out of school programs at 21 or 22. There is almost always a wait for residential supports because of the cost of those supports. But many states also have wait lists for day supports post 22. Ohio, it's about 6 years. It's about 7 years in Kentucky and Tennessee, about 8 years in North Carolina, about 13 to 15 years in Florida. As a friend of mine would say, it's forever in Texas. You should be aware, as your kids are aging out of services, what the wait lists are for supports post 22, so you as a family can plan effectively and make sure that there's something to keep your child active and engaged. We're now going to talk about SNAP. So SNAP, which formerly called food stamps, is a federally funded nutrition program. It's a monetary stipend to help low-income people buy food and groceries. It is federally funded, but it's typically administered by a state agency in your state. And while there are some federal guidelines, states have some flexibility to expand those guidelines to provide more food supports for low-income adults. Now, your child will be a low-income adult because they have to be low income to get SSI and Medicaid supports. And in fact, there are special rules for individuals who are disabled to allow them to get more access to SNAP benefits. Screener.com, where you can plug in your child's situation and see how much SNAP they might be eligible for. Now, how does SNAP work structurally? Well, first, one tweak to SNAP is that unlike other federal benefits, where parent assets and income stop counting at age 18, for SNAP purposes only, your child is part of your SNAP household until they're 22. Why? Well, otherwise, every college student in America would be on food stamps. One other difference with SNAP benefits is that unlike other benefits where there's usually an inflation rider on January 1, SNAP benefits increase on October 1. And for 2026, the maximum SNAP benefit is $298 for an individual. Money's supposed to be used for food items, but can't be used for alcohol, food eaten in the store, or tobacco products. It also can't be used for non-food items like pet food, vitamins, and medicines. So that kind of ready-to-eat hot food is kind of interesting in that you can buy a roll, turkey, breast, cheese, mustard, and lettuce separately, but you can't buy a pre-made sandwich because that's considered ready-to-eat food. Many states make it challenging to track how much is left on your SNAP benefit for that month. And there's a great app called the Propel app that allows you to have a little app on your phone to tell you how much is left on your food stamp benefit for that month. I'm not going to go into these rules. Again, you can see this at Snap Screener and on your state's website. But generally, in order to access SNAP as a non-disabled individual, if you're an individual household, you have to have income under 130% of the federal poverty limit. That's about $1,700 a month, although states can amend that. But if you are disabled, they use a net income figure that allows for deductions for a certain amount of unearned income, a standard deduction, excess shelter costs, and so forth. I would play around with this on the snapscreener.com website to see what your child is eligible for. But one secret is the more rent your child with a disability pays, the higher their SNAP benefit might be. Now, there is some double dipping here and some things to keep aware of. If you work, and I'm not going to go into this in great detail, but if you work, some of your benefits do go down for those kids who are able to work. So here's an example of someone who earned $485 in a month. Because of that, their SNAP benefit went down by $200. Sorry, their SSI went down by $200, and their SNAP benefit went down by $94. But even though those benefits went down, their total of money available still went up by $191. And so you want to be careful. If your child does work, they don't get to keep all of it, but they do end up with more money to help support themselves. So let's talk about affordable housing. Housing is a big topic these days, especially as the autism wave from the late 90s are getting older. But know that there is, on a federal government standpoint, a federal program to provide lower cost housing for lower income individuals, which will include our kids with disabilities. So affordable housing in general is a federal program to provide reduced rent housing for low income people. Eligibility is based on income. Generally, you have to be under 50% of the median income for the county or metro area that you live in. So for instance, in my home state of Connecticut for last year, in order to be eligible for affordable housing, your income had to be under about $60,000 in my hometown of Stamford. But in New Haven, Connecticut, you had to be only under $40,000. So you want to look to see, most likely your child will be eligible for that. However, as a low income benefit, it is in short stock. And so there are waiting lists for these types of programs. Typically, affordable housing is set up as project-based, often referred to as affordable housing, where an individual apartment has the low rent, and if the tenant moves out, the low rent stays with the apartment. There's also tenant-based assistance, often called Section 8 housing vouchers, where the individual gets a voucher where they can rent an apartment up to the median apartment cost in their area. And the individual pays 30% of their rent, of their income, which includes SSI or SSDI or the benefits. And the federal government makes up the rest to allow the person to afford that apartment. There are some new rules for those of you who have older children or are helping children who have a funded special needs trust. There are some newer rules when someone who is accessing affordable housing has a funded third-party special needs trust. Too extensive to go into in a workshop like this, but you should be aware the rules have changed. And if that's your situation, you should be working with your special needs planner to understand how that impacts your child or your loved one. So we've covered the four main means-tested benefits. I'm now going to cover some non-means tested benefits that may be available to your child at some point that are not based on them being poor. And those are SSDI and Medicare. And we're going to start with Social Security Disability Insurance. And at its core, it's the ability to get your Social Security early because you became disabled. So it's not based on financial need. Typically, if you were a wage earner, you would need to work your 40 quarters. You have to work for 10 years above a certain level to qualify for SSDI. I promise you, there's a reason I'm talking about this. And generally provides your Social Security early before you reach your retirement age. One of the important things about SSDI from a benefit standpoint is that once you receive SSDI for 24 months, you are now eligible for Medicare early before you turn 65. Now, there are two ways in general to receive SSDI. In some circumstances, a disabled adult who was disabled from childhood can receive SSDI off a parent's work record. Or if you are deemed to be disabled, but you're working part-time, not enough to not be disabled, but enough to start paying your own FICA taxes at a certain level, you might also get SSDI on your own work record. And I'm going to talk about both instances. So most commonly, people with disabilities who were disabled from an early age may at some point qualify for childhood disability benefits, sometimes referred to as DAC benefits, disabled adult child benefits. And the concept is you have to understand Social Security is not a savings program. It's a social insurance program. And so there are auxiliary benefits built into Social Security. The most famous one is the spousal benefit. So when Social Security was set up in the 30s, dad worked and mom stayed home and raised the kids. Dad paid into Social Security, mom never worked. But when dad retired at 65, that was the age back then, dad collected his Social Security benefit and mom got a spousal benefit equal to 50% of what dad was collecting that didn't interfere with dad's benefit. And then if dad passed away first, mom got a widow's benefit equal to 100% of what dad was receiving. Well, there's a similar auxiliary benefit for individuals who were disabled before the age of 22 and were continually disabled, met the definition of disability, until a parent started collecting Social Security. Now, this only gets triggered when a parent actually collects Social Security due to the parent dying, becoming disabled themselves, or collecting once reaching their retirement age. Remember, while full retirement age currently is 67, you can theoretically collect Social Security as early as 62. Once the parent collects, if the disabled child was deemed to be continually disabled, then they receive another auxiliary benefit equal to 50% of the parent's primary insurance amount, the amount they would have received at age 67, regardless of whether they take it at 62 or 70. And once the parent passes away, they get 75% of the parent's primary insurance amount. Now that CDB benefit is paid out as SSDI. And because of that, that will trigger Medicare as a health insurance program for that individual after 24 months, in addition to Medicaid. Now, there's no double dipping. If your child receives SSDI, whether under their work record or under the parent's work record, that is considered unearned income for SSI purposes and will wipe out their SSI dollar for dollar. But there's a special rule. It's called the Pickle Amendment after Congressman Pickle from Texas in the 70s, who realized that SSDI wiping out SSI could be a problem for Medicaid eligibility, got a special rule passed that said if the only reason your SSI is wiped out is because of SSDI, they don't lose their Medicaid, and they can keep their Medicaid waiver supports. Now, this is only in those states, those 34 states where receiving $1 of SSI qualifies you for Medicaid. If you're in a state like Connecticut, where getting SSI does not guarantee you getting Medicaid, you have to qualify in a different way and follow the state rules. In addition, this can be an issue if the disabled adult never actually received SSI because the parent became disabled or passed away when the child was under 18. And that can be some issues for Medicaid qualifications in some states. And so you do want to look at your own individual state rules for Medicaid to understand how your individual situation will be impacted by this. Now, let's talk about managing these childhood disability benefits, getting SSDI off a parent's work record. Now, first and foremost, it's predicated on a child being continually disabled from before age 22 until the benefit starts. For those who have kids who are higher functioning, if they're working and they make enough so that they're no longer considered disabled before mom and dad collect their Social Security benefit, they will lose access to this childhood disability benefit forever. So if this is a concern and your child can work and you want to make sure you're managing this benefit appropriately, if you want to take advantage of the parent's work record. In addition, if the adult child gets married, unless they're marrying another disabled adult child, they will have to rely on their spouse's Social Security benefit, not the parents. And again, if the child works too much and they're no longer considered disabled, even after they start collecting the CDB benefit, they can lose the benefit just like anyone who works too much might lose their SSDI benefit. However, if you're receiving the childhood disability benefit and you lose it because you work too much, you can get it back if you become disabled again by working less within 7 years. I have a whole workshop that goes into what happens when you work on benefits, where we go into this in more detail. In addition, there are ways to reduce countable income in order to reduce how much income counts towards those income caps to make you not disabled. The most common thing is something called an impairment-related work expense, which is if you have to pay for extra stuff to allow you to work, like a typing aid, or because you can't drive, you got to take an Uber, or you got to pay for medical supplies to allow you to work. If you pay for it yourself as a disabled individual, you may be able to deduct those expenses from your wages to reduce your countable income. Finally, there's a concept called the family maximum, which is ultimately there is a maximum amount one family can collect off of one wage earner's work record. So if mom's the wage earner and mom pays into Social Security and she gets 100% of her benefit, and dad was the stay-at-home spouse and he gets the spousal benefit of 50%, and the disabled adult child gets 50%, that 50 plus 50 plus 100 is 200% off of mom's work record. That's too much. Typically, depending on how much you've made, the most that a family can collect is somewhere between 150 to 188%. And that fluctuates based on what your base Social Security benefit is. And it's a complicated formula, but Social Security will do it for you. If you reach that family maximum, the primary wage earner's Social Security benefit will not be reduced. They'll always get 100% of that. But the two auxiliary benefits, the spouse benefit and the DAC benefit, will be reduced proportionally to stay under the family maximum limit. Now, the other way your child might be able to get Social Security is on their own work record. While we, as older folks, need to work for 10 years in order to get Social Security, if you are disabled and younger, you need less credits. So in 2026, if you earn $1,890, you get 1 work credit. If you make 4 times that, or $7,560, you get 4 work credits. If you make more than that, you don't get more work credits for that calendar year. Your work credits are just worth more. You get more Social Security. Now, if you are disabled prior to age 40, you need less work credits to fully pay into Social Security. Typically, you have to earn at least 2 credits a year after the age of 21 to qualify. So if you were an ordinary person and you became disabled at 24, say you were in a car accident, you would only need 6 work credits to qualify for SSDI on your own work record. My son is turning 28 this year. He has 11 work credits from his part-time job over the last few years. If he gets 3 work credits this year and he has 14 work credits, when he's 28, he will start to get a small SSDI benefit on his own work record. You also have to have been working in 5 of the prior 10 years. When that happens, your kid may get an SSDI benefit on their own work record and start that 2-year clock for Medicare. It's an advantage to working just enough to get the work credits, but maybe not enough to not be disabled. And something to keep in mind as you're going through benefits planning. So I have this little chart. I'll leave it up for a little bit, especially for those who will be watching this later on video, of the differences between SSI, which is a means-tested program to provide money, and SSDI, which is a social insurance program to give people money who have access to a Social Security work record, either their own or a parent's. Again, SSDI, you could have $1 million in the bank and still get it. But again, if you want Medicaid, you may not want to have $1 million. SSI requires low assets and low income. Finally, we're going to get to Medicare. So the most important thing is Medicare is not Medicaid. Most people qualify for Medicare at age 65 if they've paid into the Social Security system or are married to a spouse who paid into the Social Security system. But it's also available for some people with disabilities under the age of 65 if they've been receiving SSDI for 24 months. And Medicaid has 4 parts. Part A, which is hospital insurance, which is free. Part B, which is medical insurance, which has a base premium of, in 2026, about $205 a month. Part D, which is the prescription drug part of Medicare. And then Part C, which is a little confusing, which is a program called Medicare Advantage, which is kind of an HMO version of Medicare. It's lower cost, provides additional services, but may have some limitations, keeping you in a network of doctors, and may only work in your home state. Now, one important thing about Medicare is it's not means tested. You get it by becoming 65 or receiving SSDI for 2 years, or in some circumstances, there are certain diseases like end-stage kidney disease and ALS, which allow you to get Medicare early. But you can be on both Medicare and traditional Medicaid and still qualify for your Medicaid waiver supports. In addition, most states have a program for low-income individuals, including individuals on Medicaid, generally qualify, where your state will pay the Part B premium of Medicare, making Medicare free for our kids who qualify, who are on both Medicaid and Medicare. Now, once you get Medicare, you can choose to either be on traditional Medicare, and which can be used anywhere in the country, or on something called a DSNAP plan, which is essentially a Medicare Advantage plan that kind of melds Medicaid and Medicare together. Those DSNAP plans have certain advantages in that a lot of other things are covered that are not covered by traditional Medicare, like dental work, outside of what Medicaid provides. However, they do have those D-SNAP combined Medicare, Medicaid plans, which are essentially Medicare Advantage plans, do have some limitations, especially if your child travels out of state often. Which version of Medicare you choose for your child when they become eligible is something to discuss with a Medicare broker or perhaps your special needs planner. So I managed to make it in about an hour. So that is the end of this particular workshop. Here is my contact information for folks who have additional questions. But now I'm going to turn it back over to Wendy and the Q&A, and we can go through the questions that folks have.
I'm coming back. Here I am. Hello, hello, hello.
Hello.
That was great. There's so much. So much.
It's a lot.
Michael, I mean, for people who have kids, especially, complex kids, like who's got the time to figure all this stuff out? I don't. I just, and then to have it different for every state. I mean, you really do need somebody to advise you with this stuff, don't you?
It's tough. I think one of the challenges in a workshop like this is because we have so many different people on the line who have so many different needs, I kind of have to throw everything at them.
Yeah.
But for each family, they're looking at access at each of these different things may be more limited in terms of what they're looking to do. And typically you're not doing it all at once.
Mm-hmm.
So typically when your child turns 18, you're going to be doing the SSI and Medicaid piece. The Medicare and SSDI is not going to kick in most likely until the parents retire and are making their own Social Security decisions.
Yeah.
SNAP doesn't kick in until 22. So it is complicated, but you don't have to do it all at once. Each one is going to hit you differently. It's just going to get complicated if your kid's 28 and you haven't accessed all this stuff. Maybe then you're kind of doing everything at once, and that becomes a little overwhelming.
Yeah. I just made a note and actually went to the chat. Sorry about that, everybody. I made a note because I wanted to just mention to you, and of course you know this, but my daughter has been on SSI. I think since she was 11 or 12. I think we started getting those benefits. And she's had Medicaid since she was first diagnosed. So she was like 2.5. But when my husband became disabled, he started receiving SSDI, which automatically switched my daughter to SSDI. And as you said, after 24 months, you receive Medicare. So she had Medicaid her whole life, and now she has both Medicaid and Medicare. Now, my problem with this is that Medicaid was covering all of her medical expenses. So everything was covered and nothing out of pocket. And not only do they give you Medicare, but they make you have Medicare and they make you pay for it. So it's deducted from her monthly benefits, as is my husband's, about $220 a month coming out of their payments for Medicare. And in my daughter's case, she doesn't need it.
So for your particular situation, and again, you're in Rhode Island.
Yeah.
Rhode Island does have a Medicare savings program that should be automatic, but sometimes is not. And so since your daughter is over 18 and she is considered low income, she is probably eligible for Rhode Island's Medicare savings program. It's probably going to be something called a Qualified Medicare Beneficiary Program, QMB. And if you apply for that, your state should pay the $205 Part B premium for your daughter. That's
okay,
step one.
I'll ask about that. Thank you.
Then if there are problems with copays and other things, it all depends on how you're accessing Medicare and Medicaid together. So you can do it as a combined, that D-SNAP program that I mentioned, which is a type of Medicare Advantage. Or you can keep them separate and do traditional Medicare and use Medicaid as a Medigap program. What's going to work best for you is something to really discuss with a Medicare broker, because
Yeah.
they have much more information on that, on the ins and outs of how that's going to work in your state. But they may not be familiar with the Medicare savings program, because they're often not working with low-income adults. And technically, your daughter qualifies as a low-income adult, even though you may have a house and a job and things like that.
Okay.
Because post 18, she's now an adult and consider her own Medicaid household.
Yeah. All right. We that's definitely something we want to look into. Okay, so we have some questions here, and I think I can pop these up on the screen. Let me see.
So I see them in Q&A. So someone said, Section 8 told me I have to have a job as a head of the household to get Section 8, even though I have SSI. Is that true or not? So a lot of it, I hate to say it depends, but it depends. So if you are a disabled individual who is receiving SSI yourself, then you do not need a job to get Section 8 housing. If you are a parent of a minor child who is low income, who is receiving SSI on behalf of your child, you may have to have a job. So part of some of the recent changes to government benefits on a federal level was that they're trying to force out people who are not disabled out of means-tested benefits like Section 8 and Medicaid. So if you have Medicaid and you're not disabled, but you're low income, there are now work requirements. And if you are in Section 8 and are not disabled, then you may be kicked out after 2 or 3 or 4 years based on the current rules. However, if you are the disabled individual yourself, and that is why you are receiving SSI, then you can't be kicked out of affordable housing, and you will not have to work to continue your Medicaid and your Medicaid waiver supports. So it's really important to understand why you're receiving a benefit, and if it's you who are receiving the benefit, or are you just getting and in charge of the benefit on behalf of your minor child or your adult child.
Okay. Move on to the next one. Oh, hang on.
I can just
Let me
read
get rid
it.
of this one. Here we go.
Yeah. Oh, so we had one. Yeah. So we had a clarification. If a parent begins drawing Social Security at 62, that benefit is reduced, but the DAC child benefit is not reduced by percentage. Generally, yes, but not always. So the way that the way that childhood disability benefits work is the base child benefit is based on your benefit at 67. So I'm going to use the maximum benefit that you can get from Social Security as an example, because it'll make more sense. The maximum benefit you can get at 67, if you're a 67-year-old, right now in 2026, is around $4,000. If your benefit was going to be $4,000 at 67, if you took it early at 62, you'd get a 30% haircut, and you would only collect $2,800. On the other hand, if your benefit was going to be $4,000 at 67 and you wait till 70, you get a 24% increase and you'll get about $5,000. Regardless of when you collect your benefit, early at 62 and get $2,800, or wait till 70 and get $5,000, your child's benefit is 50% of that $4,000 primary insurance amount. And so your child will be eligible for $2,000. There is one exception. If you take your Social Security at 62 or at any time before your full retirement age, and you also work and make more than a certain amount, which is about $25,000 in 2026, not only do you get the reduction for taking it early, but by failing the retirement earnings test, your Social Security payment is reduced further. If you are below full retirement age and you work and make more than $25,000, not only is your benefit reduced, but also the child's auxiliary benefit is reduced. And that would be the one exception. So the key is, if you've stopped working and you take it at 62, your child will get 50% of your primary insurance amount. But if you take your Social Security early and your Social Security reduced benefit is reduced further from working, your child's benefit would be reduced further. It's a complicated formula.
Mm-hmm. What isn't a complicated formula?
Well, I mean, think about it. Social Security is meant to provide benefits for the individual worker, their spouse, children who are not disabled, who are under the age of 18, disabled children above the age of 18, ex-spouses in certain circumstances. My mother had two 13-year marriages and collected different Social Security benefits off of the different spouses at different times. It can get very complicated.
Yeah. It seems like all of the programs are complicated. That's why we need somebody like you to hold our hands and walk us through this stuff, because it's just overwhelming for so many of us.
It is. It does become simpler when there are specific circumstances for a particular individual. It's harder when I'm trying to describe, this is how the rule works, and I'm looking at a bunch of different permutations. Each family will only be impacted. And in some ways, that's how Social Security treats it. Social Security doesn't tell you how to rig the system. When you go to them and you say, this is my situation, they say, this is what you get. They don't tell you how the sausage is made, because they just say, this is your situation, this is what you've told us, this is what you get.
Yeah.
But if you understand the rules, you can make sure that you can maximize the system for your family.
Okay, here's a question for you. Why do you say Social Security?
I do mean Social Security. I don't mean Soul Security. It might be my New York accent. But if you're hearing if you're hearing Soul Security, I'm meaning Social Security.
Yeah, well, we know what you mean. We know what you mean. It's funny. I was just thinking that as I was listening to you through this whole presentation. I was like, is that a nickname that you came up with for Social Security? I don't know. All right, next question is about having a trust.
And that's a great. I wish I could have teed this up. So, SSI and Medicaid are means tested programs, meaning that your kid has to be, quote unquote, poor in order to access those benefits as an adult. And the Social Security defines that as having less than $2,000 in resources and having under a certain amount of income. A special needs trust, which is something that everyone on this call should have as part of their estate plan, allows you to leave money for your child in a bucket at your passing that won't count as their money for benefits purposes, but can only be used for their benefit while they're alive. Now, many people have opened up ABLE accounts, which are newfangled, dedicated disability savings accounts, which also do not count as a resource towards the resource limits for means tested benefits like SSI and Medicaid for the most part. However, an ABLE account is not a replacement for a special needs trust in your estate planning, because you cannot leave money in your estate through your will, as a beneficiary of a life insurance policy, as a beneficiary of an IRA or 401k plan. You cannot name an ABLE account the beneficiary of any of those things, meaning that you can't leave money when you die to an ABLE account. And in fact, even if you could, you can only put $20,000 a year in general into an ABLE account. And most families have a little bit more than that to give their kid when they pass away. And so you'll probably always need a special needs trust, and you should confer with an attorney in your state who understands the issues and how to create one because they are somewhat state specific. There are two great groups of attorneys that specialize this. These are national organizations. There's the Academy of Special Needs Planners, and there is a Special Needs Alliance. If you do not know an attorney in your area that can create a proper special needs trust.
Okay. You can see the questions coming in, right?
Yes. So
Okay.
someone said, I have got a letter from my kid's health insurance saying I can get on something like this. Should I apply it? I think there's a question on being more. I think we need more information on what you mean by that.
Yeah, not sure what you
in
mean.
terms of it. Someone said, I feel like all these programs are geared towards very low income families. What help is there for families just above the threshold? So remember, the thresholds that I mentioned don't count once your kid turns 18. So yes, it can be frustrating that if you have $4,000 in the bank, that your kid can't get SSI because the family income limit is $3,000. However, once your kid turns 18, you can have $1 million in the bank. And if it's not in your kid's name, it won't count against them. Part of that is that, remember, under IDEA, most of you are probably getting school services throughout to help your kids during the day in a school program. So many states, because their funds are limited, limit their Medicaid waiver supports primarily for adults. Although some high taxed states like New York and California sometimes will waive parent assets and income for access to certain Medicaid waiver supports. And even states that don't do it on a significant basis sometimes have programs to help families as well, regardless of financial need when the kids are young. Someone asked, are the HOTMA rules for, so this is someone who has affordable housing, are the HOTMA rules for affordable housing calculations of S&T special needs trusts related to income only or first party special needs trust? So I'll go into some quick detail on this. Prior to the new rules, there was not an asset limit on access to affordable housing. Starting about 3 years ago, there is now an asset limit for people to access affordable housing. That asset limit is $105,000 and change. I think I had it on a particular slide. I'll go back to it for a second. So currently, in order to meet the asset test to qualify for affordable housing, the resident has to have less than $105,574 in assets in 2026. Neither a first-party special needs trust nor a third-party special needs trust, first party being funded with the kid's own assets, third-party trust being funded with someone other than the kid, neither of those trusts count towards that $105,000 asset limit. The challenge is that affordable housing also has an income test. You have to have income under a certain amount in order to qualify for affordable housing. HUD rules have changed as to how distributions count as distributions from a special needs trust spent on the disabled individual, how those distributions count as income for that individual. There used to be very specific weird rules on how that worked. Those specific weird rules have now changed to other weird rules that are a little bit more complicated than I'd want to go into in a workshop like this. But essentially, distributions of principal from a special needs trust are not income. Distributions of income from a special needs trust is income for HUD purposes. Now, how your trust is going to determine whether a distribution was principal or income has still not been fully decided. And there's still debate among special needs planners as to how those rules are going to be implemented. If you have a funded special needs trust and your child is in affordable housing, check with your local public housing agency, the PHA that manages that affordable housing, to find out how they're going to interpret the income rules of distributions from special needs trusts. That's going to be your first place to go.
Okay.
So I'm looking here. When my minor child turns 18, he can apply for SSI in his own means. Correct. But he won't be able to get his own SNAP benefits until 22. That is also correct. For SNAP purposes only, your child who lives with you is part of your SNAP household until age 22. So if your family does not qualify for SNAP, your child will not be eligible for SNAP until that age. If you apply, they may get $20 a month. Or nothing. But you could apply. There's no harm in applying. They just won't get anything. And you may need to reapply at 22.
Okay.
So someone asked, can one qualify for SSDI as a DAC, a disabled adult child, under the parent work record and under their own work record simultaneously? The answer is yes, but you can't double dip. So let's say your child worked enough to get their own SSDI benefit of, say, $500. They are now getting a $500 SSDI benefit, but they're not working enough that they're not disabled. And sometimes the language gets a little funky. When you collect as a parent, and let's say your own Social Security benefit was $3,000, that would qualify your child for a DAC benefit of $1,500. However, they're only going to get $1,500. That $1,500 will be paid out as $500 of the child's own Social Security benefit off their own work record, and a top off of $1,000 off the parent's work record to get to the $1,500. The reason why that's important is that now your child is only collecting $1,000 off of your work record rather than $1,500. And that helps with the family maximum if there are more than two people collecting under one wage earner's work record. And it helps with the calculation as to how much if you have multiple kids with disabilities or a spouse who didn't work enough to have their own work record, that helps increase the amount the family can receive off of your work record. I think the next one was, does Social Security take care of Social Security survivor benefits for Central America? The U.S. Social Security Administration does not do anything with survivor benefits from Central America. So if your child is receiving survivor benefits from a Central American country as income, Social Security will count that as unearned income for SSI purposes, but it doesn't impact any Social Security auxiliary benefits like childhood disability benefits. The next question was, my son is 18. He has autism and ADHD. He will be going to college this fall. He does live with us at home. He does have assets. What should we apply for? So if your child's going to college, I'm assuming he's probably at a higher functioning level than some folks on the call. Remember, the definition of disabled is having a physical or mental condition, which your child does have by having autism and ADHD. By the way, usually just a diagnosis of ADHD is not enough to be disabled, because lots of people with ADHD can work. Having a combination of medical conditions, combining the autism and ADHD, may impact them enough that they can't maintain substantial gainful activity, working and earning above the $1,690 limit for 2026. I always recommend families at 18, when they're not sure if their kid's an in-betweener, what my dad would call too light for heavy work and too heavy for light work. We don't want to discourage them, but we want to make sure they're protected. My feeling is apply for the benefits today. The younger your kid is, the closer they are to 18, the easier it is to prove that they can't work. At 18, they haven't worked. You can show school records, you can show how it's impacting them, how their executive function issues may impact their ability to work, and get them qualified. If they go to college and graduate, Social Security will take that into account, and if you're applying at 22 or 24 or 28 because they failed to launch, the more education they go through, the harder it is, the more invisible their disability becomes, the harder it is for Social Security to imagine they can't get some job working at Target 35 hours a week. So I always encourage families to apply as early as possible. It's also, by the way, you can't apply before 18 for SSI because, technically, because the definition of disability changes at 18, you have to reapply to make sure you qualify under the adult version of the disabled rules. But typically, most families have too much income or too much assets for your child to get SSI under 18. It can work for some families. You shouldn't discount it, but most families will not be eligible. But applying once your kid turns 18 makes it easier to continue to prove they're disabled as opposed to trying to prove it later on. I think the next one was any tips on what parents of disabled children should be doing before the age of 18 to prepare the SSI adult disability determination. So there's two things families should do in preparation for turning 18. The first is make sure you have a diagnosis, whether that's a privately paid evaluation or an evaluation from the school. In order to qualify as disabled, you have to have a medical or physical condition. I find this can be an issue for some parents who homeschool their kids. They don't have any testing. They have no way to prove the child has a diagnosis. And having a diagnosis at age 3 of autism, because autism is a very broad spectrum, may not be enough to prove they can't work. So that's number one. You should have some testing. This can be very, very important in states like Connecticut, where in order to qualify as intellectually disabled, in order to get our main Medicaid waiver services, that diagnosis of intellectual disability has to be made before age 18. The way our state has interpreted our current laws, it's not that the disability started before age 18, it had to be diagnosed before age 18. And that means having some report by a psychologist from school or an outside therapist. Next, you want to also prepare them financially. So if there are custodial accounts, if there are bank accounts, if there are savings bonds, I hate savings bonds because kids get savings bonds, especially in the old days where savings bonds were pieces of paper. You'd get like $25 from Great Aunt Tilly and $100 from Uncle Bob, and then you'd put them in an envelope and they would sit in a drawer for 30 years and you'd forget about them. But they still count as a resource, even if you've forgotten about them. And if by adding those savings bonds, your kid was over $2,000 for a month, Social Security has the right to ask for their money back. So besides just getting the medical testing that will help show that they can't work because of their medical condition, you also want to prepare them financially to be under the asset and income limits for accessing those means tested benefits.
Okay. We are almost at 90 minutes, Michael. So let me put up one last question for you. Thank
Sure.
you for answering so many. And thanks to everybody who is online and asking questions. We could keep you here all night, I am sure. But let me put up this last one about a special needs trust because I think this is really important. Is it really advisable to create a special needs trust? The adult child will never be able to have those funds paid directly to them. It can only be paid to providers for clothing or vacations. Can you address that?
Sure. It is always advisable to create a special needs trust as part of your estate plan. I'm a big believer in that. Partially because, yes, you can't give your kid cash directly. There's ways around that, by the way, but you can't give your kids cash directly. Well, sorry, the trustee of the special needs trust cannot give cash to the kids directly, but it can pay for clothing, rent in certain circumstances, um, vacations, new iPads, job coaching. However, there are some tools for those of you who have kids who can manage their own money. And by the way, if your kid can't manage their own money, you probably wouldn't want to give them cash anyway. But for those of you who have some higher functioning kids who can manage some of their own affairs, there are tools that can be used to give them some autonomy using a specific kind of managed prepaid debit card. Through the Social Security Palms, you can use a managed prepaid debit card, something like TrueLink, which are mentioned in the Palms, to allow a special needs trustee to put money on a prepaid debit card. And as long as certain requirements are put in place, like not being able to use the card at an ATM to get cash, and not being able to use the funds for shelter if they're still on SSI, the child can be given a certain amount of autonomy to spend the money as they wish within certain limitations without interfering with means-tested benefits. So the whole point of the special needs, when you think about what the government will provide, while many adults do have large-ish budgets, the cost of a group home could be probably starts at about $150,000 per resident, and up from there if they have higher needs. But even those budgets for residential services typically cover the roof over their heads, food in their mouths, and staff to keep them safe. It generally doesn't provide anything else. There's not enough money for it. And their SSI money is required to offset the cost to the state of that residence. And so they only get a small personal allowance once they move into some kind of residential situation to pay for things that they like. My son likes license plates. He subscribes to the American License Plates Collectors Association magazine. It costs $79 a year. That cannot be paid for by his Medicaid waiver supports. His special needs trust will pay for that. He likes to go to the Kalahari Water Park for his birthday. We're going in August for his 28th birthday. Mom will go to the spa. I'm going to run around on the water slides with him. His special needs trust will pay for that because that's what he likes to do on his birthday. The special needs trust is there to replace all the things you currently pay for your child out of your pocket. It's a replacement wallet in a way that doesn't interfere with their benefits.
Right. All right. There are some questions that we did not get to. There's also questions about how to get in touch with Michael. His contact information is on the screen right now. The website is belvederewealthpartners.com, and you can reach Michael via email at mbelloff@belvederewp.com. Michael, thank you so much again.
Thank you, Wendy, for having me. And I look forward to doing more of these with you in the future.
Oh, does that mean you'll do another one? Okay.
I'll do another one.
Okay. Well, we'll keep asking. Thank you so much. We do appreciate your time and your expertise. It really helps to have somebody break this stuff down when you're feeling overwhelmed from it all. Thank you to everyone who jumped into our live streams on YouTube and on Facebook tonight. We were happy to have you. And just so you know, this video will be saved and edited, and we'll upload it to our website very soon if you'd like to watch it again. We do not have slides for you from this particular webinar. However, we're going to have access to the video that you can watch at any time. And hopefully we will see you all again very soon. If you are not signed up on our newsletter, be sure to join that for upcoming webinars and podcast episodes. We have some interesting stuff that will be coming soon. And we'll see you soon. Thank you so much. Michael Beloff, appreciate you. Have a great
Thank you, Wendy.
night. Good night, everyone.